Aloha, Talofa lava, kia ora. Hello, everybody. A few island greetings there, because today we're going to be talking about the Kuo-toa, and they are degenerate fish-like humanoids that once inhabited the shores and islands of the surface world. Long ago, they were one of the most dominant species of the prime material world, and they knew of the time of the aboleths and the rise of the first Illithid Empire and the coming of the gods and the war between the elves and the giants and the dragons and the downfall of the giant civilization and the coming of the elven civilization and the downfall of the elven civilization, the great dwarven kingdoms, the rise of the human world's civilization, the empires, and the constant ebbing and flowing of the orcish and goblinoid races. And through all of these ages, they have slowly lost their foothold and been driven further and further underground and off the surface world, to the point where now the deep ocean and the where the Underdark meets the sea is their home, and they can no longer really tolerate the sunlight, although they do have dreams of one day reconquering the surface world and regaining their once lofty position as masters of the primitive world. And by primitive world, I mean back when these things were first around, there were dinosaurs and there were no mammals. That's how long ago it was. Their slow supplanting kind of started off when reptilian humanoids and them were basically the only competition that they had was reptilian races and things. And when the mind flayers and aboleths took interest in them, they were kind of an offshoot of the scum, who were a race that were created by the aboleths as a servant race. And the mind flayers took over from that original mastery and wholly subsumed them under slavery. And the brutal mental punishment of the Illithid's constant psychic warfare against them weakened their already feeble minds, and madness is an epidemic amongst the Kuo-toa society. It has been for millennia, to the point where they've built their civilization around it. Now, in their own society, they are fairly independent of each other. They don't recognize any family bond. They recognize themselves as a people, but they don't recognize father or mother, because they are raised as an amphibian sort of spawning. They spawn like fish, so they spawn in a pool of briny, salty water that they consider to be a sacred place. And the hatchlings are known as fingerlings, and they grow to, when they're about a foot tall or so, or a foot long, they start to exhibit, much like frogs, they start to grow their humanoid features, and they gain the ability to breathe air. Of course, at this stage, they look very much like little fishy frog people, and they pen them together by their gender, generally, and they select out ones which are of a noble breed, and I'm not sure how they can tell these apart, but they do, maybe by smell or taste or something. And they segregate those as special fingerlings to be raised as priests, and whips and the special monitors. The fact that they are mad, and madness is a part of their culture, it may be partially because their minds just are not really fit to hold intelligence very much. But it also may be that they suffer from rampant parasites, because most fish in the sea have mites and other forms of parasitic things which latch onto them as they gain a certain amount of age. And it may well be that Kuo-toa have parasites that affect their mental abilities, diseases specific to themselves, but also their religious practices and things like that. They brush very closely against the far realm in the deep places of the Underdark, and that has a warping effect on living things as well. They have monitors in their society which are the equivalent of monks. They're trained in unarmed combat, non-lethal combat for the most part, and their sole function in their society is to control the madness, control those who have gone berserk or gone into a frenzy, or doing something which is harmful to others, harmful to their society in general, and they will stop them and subdue them till they can either be calmed or sacrificed. And they're sacrificed to their own gods. The Kuo-toa they're synonymous with worshipping weird gods or weird religion, and it's quite often a brutal religion. They have interesting deities in that they're sort of split between clerics of Blibdolpoop. Blibdolpoop is kind of their mother goddess, and uh, she's a humanoid with a lobster face. Yeah, kind of freaky looking. And there's also worshippers of Dagon, and Dagon is where H.P. Lovecraft's and the Deep Ones sort of connection with the Kuo-toa came in later on. But originally, Gary Gygax designed these guys just as a progenitor, as a very early race that's still around, that was driven underground and worship weird gods. So they have cities, Sloopdilp Monpulp and Lublisha and Ulith. So their natural language is kind of weird. They do speak. It's Kuo-toan is kind of a perverted version of the aquatic Aquan language of the elemental plane of water. They also speak deep speech and Aquan. They get on fairly well with, I mean, they mind their own business in the Underdark, and they don't antagonize other races. And their sacred sites are also popular meeting grounds where slaves and goods are traded in the Underdark. They're fairly safe, and that's part of the role of the monitors, is to control the craziness of the Kuo-toa around these marketplaces where they do their commerce and trade, because otherwise they would have no access to refined metals and things like that. It's very hard for them to make themselves. They favour simple outfits, leather jerkins, that sort of thing, and just items and things that they can carry or wear. And they favour pincers, seashells, coral, that sort of thing. In the deep Underdark, corals are relatively rare luxury and something that they consider as precious as gems. They have an armor class of 13, which is natural armor. They carry a shield, and in they smear a sticky substance over the shield, and as a reaction, when a creature misses the Kuo-toa with a melee weapon attack, it can use the sticky shield to catch the weapon, and the attacker must roll a DC 11 strength saving throw, or essentially they just have to give up the weapon because it's stuck fast to the shield. If the wielder won't let go of the weapon, they're effectively grappled while the weapon is stuck to the shield. And while stuck to the shield, of course, it can't be used. The creature could pull the weapon free by making an attack, taking an action and making another DC 11 strength check and succeeding. Or the Kuo-toa could simply release the shield, let it go, or engage in basically a tug of war. They've got a strength of 13, so they've got a +1 on their strength checks. They've got a dex of 10, constitution 11, intelligence of 11, wisdom of 10, and a charisma of 8. So they're the equivalent of a human being, really. They've got a hit points 18, speed of 30 feet, swim speed of 30 feet, and they've got the ability to see out to 120 feet in total darkness with a passive perception of 14. So that's a +4 skill check on their perception. They're amphibious. They can breathe both air and water equally well. They have no restrictions on the depth that they can swim. They have an otherworldly perception, which means that they can sense the presence of any creature within 30 feet of it that is invisible or on the ethereal plane, and it can pinpoint such a creature that's moving around. So they have a utility to other races to have them around, particularly if they're under threat by ethereal creatures. And how Kuo-toa have this ability is basically they've got a foot in madness. They see see strange things and things that might not necessarily be there, but they're more aware of oddness. It's kind of a survival trait to know when things are going a little bit wacky, when the far realm is impinging on reality. It pays not to be there. So it's a survival trait. Those who can see incursions into reality have survived. Also, they just have naturally really good a sense of vibration around them, and a sense of taste of the air and things. They do have large fishy eyes that tend to look around in different directions, much like a chameleon, so they're a little bit disconcerting to talk to, hence their charisma is a bit low. And of course they have a fishy stink to them. They smell like old fish, and their body is soft and flabby. They've got stringy sort of twisted muscles underneath a smooth, slick, slimy skin. They've got clawed hands and feet that are quite large and gangly. Their arms and legs are fairly short and stubby compared to the rest of their body. They have a natural sort of a grey coloration, but they get darker when they're angry and lighter when they're scared, and more of a brownish or greenish coloration for the males of their species. And quite often they'll have a frilly crest, or warts or frills or spines, or exaggerated fangs, weirdly coloured irises in their eyes. They'll have pupils which are contracted or expanded differently on either side of their head, eyes of different shape, and yeah, all sorts of strange mutations amongst their different breeds that tend to characterize them as different groups or tribes. And of course different affectations and colorations of their markings and their decorations that they wear. They they are slippery, so they have an advantage on ability checks and saving throws make to escape a grapple. They are sensitive to sunlight, like many other Underdark creatures, and they have disadvantage on attack rolls as well as perception checks that rely on sight while in any sunlight. They have a natural bite attack, +3 to hit, and it does 3 points of piercing damage. Otherwise, they generally use a spear, which is handy to use with their shield, and that's +3 to hit. It's got 20 to 60 foot range and 4 points of piercing damage, or 5 piercing damage if used with 2 hands, if they've let go of their shield. And they also use nets with +3 to hit as well. The range on those is only about 5 feet close range or 15 feet long range with a long range throw. But they can target large or smaller creatures, and the target will be restrained, making a DC 10 strength check to free itself. So you can also slash the net with doing 5 points of damage to free yourself as well. But you can get out of the nets without damaging them and use them against the Kuo-toa. Of course, they're much more slippery and able to get out of nets. So typically, they really, really hate surface dwellers and will go out of their way to kill any warm-blooded individual from the surface world. They're also not too keen on reptilians because they've had a long... It's basically like the rivalry between dwarves and elves. It goes back a long way. They have a lot of bitter feuds with the reptilians. So Yuan-ti, they generally don't like mer people, and also Sahorgan because they're just crazy. Meros. There's a lot of different aquatic creatures which they don't tend to get on with very well. However, they've got no problem with Drow and other Underdark species. The Drow tend to favour the Kuo-toa around because the Kuo-toa keeps slaves. They specialise in capturing them. They use pincer spears, which I think is a bit of an oversight that they haven't included them in here in the monster manual. Oh yes, they have. Here we go. No, they haven't. Pincer staff, there we go. Yeah, the whips. So whips are combat trained. They're specialists who like to keep slaves or capture slaves. And they also have the ability to cast spells. So they cast as a second level spellcaster, and they can use Sacred Flame, Thaumaturgy, Bane, Shield of Faith, and they have a multi-attack which they can use biting and using their pincer staff. And the pincer staff is basically a man catcher. If you've never seen one of those things before, it looks like a U-shaped, levered. It's like one of those grabber things that people use. You know. So it's +4 to hit, 10-foot reach, and does 5 points of piercing damage. And the target, if it's a medium or smaller creature, is grappled with a DC of 14 to end the grapple. And I would say that they would grapple you, and your character, and then others would close in on that character and bind their hands and feet as quickly as possible, and then strike to subdue and wrap them up in nets and things, and drag them around and beat them mercilessly until they're unconscious, or possibly smear some sort of substance in their face which would knock them unconscious if they save a Constitution saving throw. The archpriests are the blessed followers of either Dagon or Blibdulbul, and they have 97 hit points. The whips have 65 hit points, and they've got much increased spell abilities, so they can cast guidance or sacred flame or thaumaturgy as cantrips, detect magic, sanctuary, shield of faith, hold person, spiritual weapon, spiritual guardians, tongues, control water, divination, mass cure wounds, and scrying. So these guys would stand behind a big swarm of these things, and they can use cure mass cure wounds on a large group of them to basically send them in wave after wave to attack you. Because they have 2 slots which they could cast that twice within a combat. And of course summon spiritual guardians and things to harass you. They have a scepter, +6 to hit, and does 6 bludgeoning damage. And they can also unleash 14 points of lightning damage with that scepter as well. One of the things with the Kuo-toa in previous incarnations is that if a couple of them could gather together and generate a lightning flash amongst themselves, I'm not entirely sure how they do that, some sort of primal energy which they can summon and direct. Although they are not immune to lightning strikes themselves. So the monitors, if you do get into combat with them, they use bite and unarmed strikes. So their bite is +6 to hit, 4 points piercing damage. The unarmed strike is 6 points, +6 to hit, and does 5 bludgeoning damage +3 lightning damage. And that stuns you. If you're hit with that lightning damage, you can't take reactions until the end of the Kuo-toa's next turn. So it's basically like getting hit with a taser. Don't stun me, bro! So yeah, Kuo-toas, they've got weird religions. They tend to erect shrines, and their shrines are very old. And they protect them with mad fervor. If you damage any of their artifacts and things like that, they don't take it very well at all. First of all, you're most likely to be playing a character from the surface world, and the Kuo-toa are naturally going to hate you anyway, and will automatically try and take you slave, or for sale to the Drow or other underground races, or at the very least sacrifice you to their god. If it's a form of Dagon, you'll be sacrificed beside a large body of water, probably a sea. And it would be a shrine which is probably reaching out over the sea so that your blood would flow into the sea, and be churning up with some sort of creature underneath there, which is a minion of Dagon. Otherwise, Blibdulbul, you would probably be sacrificed and turned into some sort of substance which is fed into their spawning pools, which would nourish the fingerlings for the next generation, because Blibdulbul is the mother goddess, so she's mainly concerned about regeneration of their species or continuation of their species. So to her, you're just food. Other than that, if you're an underground race, or you can masquerade as one of the races they deal with, they're fairly reasonable. And you can trade with them and buy slaves, get directions and things like that. They have excellent information on the Underdark, and they know every nook and cranny because they've lived down there for thousands of years. They will know very quickly if trade routes and things like that have been cut off due to underground activity or natural disasters or geological activity. and they will know shortcuts to get around the entire world simply traveling underground. So they have an incredible depth of knowledge that may be a little bit sketchy on things that happened up in the surface world, maybe a little bit sketchy if they were ever in a war or something like that and a large number of them were killed off, including their shamans, which would have kept this information. But they would be a very good race to infiltrate and get information from as best you could. One of the best ways of doing that, of course, is to trade their own artifacts from other areas of the world to them, because they see everything as precious. Or if you can get hold of coral or other artifacts from the surface world sea and take them down to the Underdark, they are precious to them and would definitely better than any sort of gem or anything like that. They do favour gold because it's resistant to the corrosion of seawater, but they have no use for copper pieces or anything like that. So that's the Kuo-toa for you. Generally speaking, if you're going to get into mass combat with those things, stay out of melee range with them, and if you can, try and masquerade as a mind flayer and make spooky psychic noises, and you might manage to scare them off.